Another great example that I love is when the sewing machine was invented. And look this up because this is like both amazing, wonderful, and horrific. There was a riot in Paris with all the seamstresses literally going house to house, finding and destroying sewing machines. And they went to factories and they burnt them down because they were so scared it would come and it would take away their job. And I say this because I think the next huge thing will be AI, but the way of looking at it is critical.
Hi, welcome to the Doctor's Den. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of hosting Shmuli Goldberg. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at VinciWorks. Previously, he led a marketing team at 4 incredible, fast-growing, and successful Israeli startups, helping build each company from under 10 employees to over 100 employees, and from pre-revenue to over $10 million. He is a self-professed marketing nerd and has spent an unhealthy amount of time focusing on marketing strategy, execution, analytics, and optimization. He's worked with hundreds of technology startups in the Israeli ecosystem and has been a featured speaker at industry conferences all over the world. Shmuli, it is a pleasure to have you with me.
Great to be here. This is going to be fun.
This is going to be spectacular. So I actually want to start with a little bit of your background and how you sort of found your way into high tech. So can we just start there? Like, where did you come from and how did you get to high tech?
Oh, that is an interesting story. So originally from England, lived there till I was early 20s, then moved to Israel, got married both in a very short amount of time, both at an exceptionally young age. And then I found myself in IDC Herzliya working, learning, studying economics, studying business management, marketing. And as often happens in universities, there's a bunch of people with good ideas for startups. And I found myself speaking with quite a few of them and helping them set up their marketing campaigns for this startup idea and that startup idea. I worked for about 3 or 4 months with a company called Iganu, which was trying to be a Facebook, but just for Israel. This was before Facebook actually got to Israel, so there was a market at the time. And then Facebook came here and the market disappeared. And at the same time, I've always been in the tech world. I've been building, fixing computers, laptops since I was a kid. It's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, you're a self-professed geek and nerd. Let's be honest. You're a gamer and stuff like
yep.
in depth.
I wear all of those badges with pride. No problem.
Okay. All right. So how does that lead you to where you're at now? Like, how did that happen?
So first out of university, I went for a job interview for a company back then, which had 2 people, called Clicktail. And I met with the founders. We had interesting conversations. And because I spoke the language of technology and because I understood not just on a surface level, but quite in depth what they were actually doing, and my ability from a marketing degree and economics degree to kind of translate that into value for the end user, the positioning, how you'd actually pitch this, that secured me my first job. I started in Clicktail when we were, as I said, I think I was hired 3 or 4 or something like that. I stayed there until we were over 120 people, offices, a few offices around the world, and well over, as I said, $10 million in revenue. And at that point, I was like, great, I loved the journey. The first 4 years was amazing. How do I do that again? So I found another startup, another 2 or 3 people, company called Feedvisor, and I've basically done rinse repeat. I joined companies very early stage, nearly always in the first 5 people, nearly always pre-revenue. And I built up the marketing teams, and not just marketing, like rev ops, a little bit of sales, a little bit of account management. Basically,
because that's the nature of startups. When you're talking about small teams, you're wearing like 12 hats. Even you're the CMO. Wait, you're the CMO, but you're also doing this, and sales.
Correct.
Right, like
when I started at Clicktail, I was also customer support. I had a second email called Craig Blackwell, and Craig Blackwell was the customer support agent at Clicktail, and that was me as well. So yeah, you wear every hat when you start.
Right. So, as someone who's gone through that process, it's one of the things which I love doing. I love working with small companies that are ready to scale, and suddenly they have to like actually define roles and give people responsibilities. Can you like tell me some of the tips, like some insider tips of things you would say to someone whose company is like, really, we're scaling, we're ready, we're doing this? What are some of the major things you say focus on these?
Oh, there's a lot, and it really does depend on the business. One of the first things I would say is start tracking data before you need it. Like every business gets to the stage where, I don't know, you want to look back over your sales pipeline to understand what closed, or you want to look at your
Mm-hmm.
marketing campaigns to see what brought in revenue, or you want to understand, the market movements or customer segmentation. And
Mm-hmm.
typically, the best time to start collecting that data is about a year before you actually need it.
Right.
So for things like having Google Analytics set up, having trackers set up, putting some sort of CRM in place, even if it's the Salesforce $25 license, having something there that means that when you first speak to your Series A investors and they're saying, great, what does your sales funnel look like? You're not then
Mm-hmm.
scrambling to make up and look back through emails to find out, wait, who did we speak to and when did we speak to them? But you
Right.
have that initial data put forward. And it's so easy to do.
And data talks. Like that's the fundamentals of this. When you want to scale, especially when you're trying to get funding, data will be the thing that will make or break your ability to take that final leap.
Yeah, there's a great saying that I've seen so many times in the industry. I mean, it's a great saying. I don't think other people have said this, but I definitely think this is true. That to get your seed fund, you need a good idea on a deck. To get your Series A, you need customer interest. To get your Series B, you need some sort of revenue. And to get your Series C, you've got to actually know how you're going to scale this forward. And most companies I speak to are either just before Series A or just after. And at that point, even if you haven't got revenue, even if you haven't got a strong commercial kind of validation, having those conversations in place, having those customers who you've spoken to and they can vouch for the idea, or they may even be in the sales cycle, so you know a projection of who's going to be your first customers,
Mm-hmm.
is already incredibly valuable.
Okay, so from there, let's understand a little bit about this. When you find yourself coming into a new company who is, pre-revenue, what are some of the major things you want to focus on in marketing in order to help them get from that point, that pre-seed or post pre-seed but before series A, get them through that hump? What are some of the things that you're going to help them do in order to make sure that they are in that trajectory that you're looking for?
It's a good question. In my mind, it comes down to two things. The first one is know who your customer is. Many companies that I speak to at that stage, they don't know if they're selling to banks or insurance companies or individuals or small startups or government agencies. And I think one of the first things to map out is, okay, who's the number one customer? And if you really don't know, that's fine. Have two or three to test. But
Right.
you want to try and work out, am I selling to small businesses? Am I selling to businesses in the UK or the US or Middle East?
I think
Um,
one of my most fundamental issues with this is that very often when I've worked with pre-seed or when I've worked with people who are just post pre, like, seed but have not yet gone series A, is they think they know. They think they know, and they don't know. They don't know.
so, okay, this is the geek in me coming out. You can always disprove a hypothesis,
Right,
but you need a hypothesis initially.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So walking in and saying we don't know, and I've had companies that I've spoken to over the years who are like, listen, we don't yet know if we're B2B or B2C. Like, well, those are fundamentally different businesses. Channels are different, pricing is different, go to market is different. Like that level of distinction, you have to get out of the way very quickly. And typically by the end of seed, they know, okay, we're B2B, for example. Well, then you enterprise, medium business, small business. Is this a hands-on sale? Is this a self-serve through the website? So, of the two things I need to work out, in my opinion, that's number one. Number two is what are your low-hanging fruit for growth? What are the things you can do today or tomorrow to bring in your first 100 leads? Um, and understanding that nearly always the CEO is acting as the salesperson and often the head of marketing for these companies at this stage. Like, what are the skills that he can leverage? It could be a great LinkedIn connection. It could be investors who are willing to make introductions. It could be that you've got you want to start a Facebook campaign or an AdWords campaign. Often it's a conference that is, going to happen in 3 months' time that you can go to and meet people on the ground there. But what are those first channels in? So number one is who you're trying to speak to, and number two is where are they?
Right.
You'll notice that I didn't say yet kind of what's the value or what's the product.
Yep.
Mainly because you don't always know at this stage. If you do, it's a great added bonus, but I think that's what evolves the most over the first 18 to 24 months of a business life cycle.
Which is interesting because if you think about how people put together a deck, very often they're talking to a pain point. They go, oh, there's this pain point. Let me speak to your pain. Let me speak to the pain of the people who I'm trying to, see as my customers, my ICP. And I'm going to use that as the way to explain why my technology is the technology that's going to answer this pain. But ultimately, that value that you're suggesting you bring is in and of itself a hypothesis. You may be solving a pain, but you don't know if it's the pain for these people until you've actually dealt with them and refined that value that you're bringing in depth.
Yeah, I think you've got it bang on, but it's more than that. You're speaking to a pain. You're not yet speaking to a solution.
Right.
And this is a mistake which companies in the last year and a half to 2 years are making across the world, which is they're speaking solution first because AI is a thing. So they're saying comments like, we found an AI that will help you, hire better employees. We have an AI that will help you manage your finances. We'll have an AI that will help you, whatever it may be. But that's solution first. Because the truth is, if I have a problem hiring people, I don't care if it's an AI solution, if it's a person I'm paying in Latvia to sit and scrape LinkedIn, or it's flying pixies, from Jamaica that are just really good at finding great employees. The solution, AI, is a tool. It's a means to an end. Speak to the pain, sure. How you solve that pain, right now less than your customers do about what they actually need. So start the process and learn with them. Maybe AI is an amazing solution. Maybe AI is a distraction and completely ignores the actual pain point. But again, you're right. You've got to speak to the pain. I don't think you yet know what your product or solution actually is.
But what's happening, and I think it's happening quite a lot now, is that even when they put together their deck, they like use the pain as just a window to start talking about, oh, we have the solution, as opposed to helping their potential, venture capitalists or whoever's going to be involved in funding, or their potential customers really feel the pain. When you get the person to understand the pain in depth and how it's impacting them or the customer, it changes the nature of the dialogue. No,
absolutely. Your goal in a pitch deck, and we've already covered 4 topics in the first 10 minutes here.
I know this is great. See, this is my welcome to my podcast.
Great to be here.
This is what I do.
The goal of a pitch deck is to first and foremost convince investors that there is a problem that exists that is a big enough and painful enough problem that the person that happens to solve this problem will be worth, $1 trillion. And I've seen, here's a $44 billion market, here's a $125 billion market. You hear all these numbers. They're all talking to how big this pain is. That's about the size of the pain. And then that's 2/3 of your pitch deck. The last pitch deck is, why have you got the solution that no one else has?
Right.
So it could be we have a patented technology that. It could be we've discovered, the source of diamonds in the coal mine, which. It could be we are the people who built ABC. But 2/3 is convincing people that the market exists and the pain is real, and 1/3 convincing them if somebody's going to solve it, it's going to be us.
Right. Not only is it going to be us, but we're going to do it in a way which is actually attractive to the people experiencing this pain.
Yeah.
Not just to people who hear about the pain, but to the people who are actually experiencing it. It will be attractive enough for them to want to actually fork over money.
Yeah. Don't forget, not all, but a large chunk of leading technologies that we use nowadays on a daily basis were not the first in their field.
Right.
Skype was not the first VoIP by quite a way. Gmail wasn't the first free email client. Zoom was not the first online
Yahoo?
video program. Exactly. Like, there's an advantage to being the first mover. I mean, that's why it's called the first mover advantage. But it tends not to mean victory, especially in the B2C and in the tech world. And if you're looking at kind of who's owning different pieces right now, there are very few first movers still there, because if the pain is big enough, you can launch a mediocre product and it will solve the problem and you will build a company. If you remember GoToMeeting, perfect problem, perfect solution. But when somebody else builds a better mousetrap, and if you have that better mousetrap, then you come along with a Zoom and you're able to unseat the incumbent because your product is that much better. So it's almost like two stages. First, there's a pain which is just like brute force solved with some hammer. And when it works, it's brilliant. And that's your first mover. And then a scalpel comes along afterwards and realize, actually, if we tweak these small things, we can make a much better product to solve the exact same pain. And they tend to take market dominance. Gmail is a perfect example of that.
Right. Or Google, like as a search engine, is in and of itself an example. Like, it's not called Yahooing; it's called Googling.
How much more fun though would it be if it was called Yahooing? Let's just decide that's what it should be called.
I'm gonna go Yahoo now.
Yeah. Try that, by the way. Next time somebody comes along and there's a question, you know what? I'm going to go ask Jeeves. I'll let you know in 10 minutes.
Oh, Ask Jeeves. I miss Ask Jeeves.
Everyone does.
I want to take this for a minute to another place where you've not only had to take companies and like really formulate their marketing, but you've also had to build teams and help companies build not just marketing teams, but also help them understand how to market the company to potential hires, right? Because part of, and people don't really think about this, but part of what marketing does is it is part of the way you find those really great engineers, because they go, ooh, I want to work there.
Yep.
And people don't think about it in that way. They go, oh, that's HR. No. Marketing also has to market to the people who we want to hire, sort of subtly in its own way. So can you please explain to me how you see marketing in its relationship to getting the really great people you want on in a company?
Yes, marketing definitely plays a part in that, but I would say very early on, and I'm talking when you're under 30 people, maybe even 20 people, as good a marketing as good as your marketing may be to bring people in, it's really the CEO and it's the founders and it's the culture that they bring that sells it. Especially if you have an interesting problem that you're solving and you have a strong technology CTO and he's able to explain that problem to engineers. Like, people like good meaty challenges. So explaining what that is and how you intend to solve it. Some of the best first hires, especially in the development space, were all people that the CTO went out for them for coffee. And to quote CTO from my last company before this, put packets of sugar on the table and packets of salt on the table and kind of mapped out the architecture to the point where the 3 engineers that he was talking to all said, yeah, I want in. And all 3 started.
Right.
And the same is true in his way with sales and marketing. Like, it's the CEO, it's whoever's leading the business side of the business to explain what that problem is that you're going to solve and lay out the path to success. People follow people. People don't follow companies.
Right.
I know so many people who've quit their job because of their boss or have stayed in a mediocre job because their boss was amazing. Right. People work for people as a vastly generalization of a rule. So I would say your first 20, 30 employees is all about that one-on-one connection. Getting them in the door, at least at this stage in Israel, is relatively easy. You put a job posting up there, you post on LinkedIn, you let people know that you're looking, you'll get those first people in the door. Right. I think the mistake that founders continually make is that they forget that the person they're interviewing is interviewing them in equal measure. So I have sat in interviews where it felt like the founder was like, I am here to offer you a job. If you're lucky, maybe I'll give you one. And I think what they don't realize is they're putting off good people.
So bad. It's so bad when people do that. It drives me insane. I had a client the other day. I was talking to him, and he was like, I can't take this job. It's phenomenal. The pay is great. The manager, it happens to be the CMO, sorry,
Hey, I take no offense.
absolutely full of himself and was interviewing him as opposed to having a good conversation with him about like what it's like to work here and what do you want to bring and where do you want to grow and who do you want to be 3 years from now and stuff like that. And like he was like, there was no thought of like what I want to do. They just wanted to know what they could get from me. I was like, oh,
yep. And in the tech world, especially in the Israeli tech world, it is such a small industry where really everyone has, you're two connections away from anywhere else. Mm-hmm. The amount of times I've been talking to a company or involved in a company and I get a message from them saying, hey, I hear you're meeting with this guy, or I hear you're maybe consulting for these people, or you may be taking this job. I know the guy there, you may want to be cautious, or I know that founder, she's a little bit up herself or worried about this. It really does spread very quickly. So keeping that name for yourself. You're talking about marketing, I'm going to shape the conversation differently. This is about branding. Like you got to have yourself, a brand as a great person to work for in order to bring in those first employees.
And it's so interesting. Like people don't understand the difference between marketing and branding, and it's not the same thing. One of them sort of helps shape the other one a little bit, and vice versa. But
in a nutshell, okay. Sales is one person speaking to one person. Marketing is one person speaking to many people. Branding is what they say about you when you're no longer in the room. And I think I stole that quote from either Steve Jobs or one of the other Apple guys. But marketing is what, you say to people. Branding is what they're saying about you. And it's very, very true. Your brand is just that. Your brand is when I'm not there and people are talking about me, not me saying it, but saying it to each other, what are they saying?
What are people saying about me? And it's not just what are people saying about me, but how does my being brought up in a conversation make other people feel?
Yep.
It's not just about what they're saying. It goes, marketing is more about what you're saying. I mean, you try and speak to pain, you try and speak to things, but branding is about how you make a person feel when you're not in the room anymore and someone brings up your name.
Correct. And if I'm building out a marketing map, if I'm building a messaging map, which is so tedious and one of my most fun things to do because I'm a marketing nerd, you map pain, product, value. Pain is, what's my problem? I don't know. I'm thirsty. Product is, this is a cool glass of water. And then value is always the opposite of pain. So value is, you're no longer thirsty. And I think a mistake that marketers make is they think that the product is the value. So they say, buy our water. It's cold. It's fresh. But the actual value the customer gets is, you feel refreshed and you're no longer thirsty. Right. So when you're on the marketing side, as much as possible, you get to control that message, and you get to dictate what are people talking about because you're having the conversation. Maybe it's a monologue, maybe it's a dialogue, depending on where you're having it. But when you're marketing, you get to sculpt what you say. Branding is taken out of your hands. You can shape, you can hope, maybe you can point it in a different direction. But I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. PR is like branding 101. You're speaking to a reporter, you give them the message, they go on and they say what they want to say, and then other people discuss it down the line. So, 3 years down the line, conversations can change and stories can be sculpted in a way that you don't want them to or you do want them to. And that's branding.
Right. Okay. That was a great pause, but we got to go back to the other because I want to hear about how you feel about building teams. I want to talk about building teams. No, this was super important because I actually think that when you talk about branding on the personal level, as someone who deals with leadership and followership as part of how I help companies scale, because I bring followership, it's part of what I do. I firmly believe in that idea. One of the things that I know is that branding in terms of personal brand, how you come across as a leader, your ability to translate your leadership styles based on your followers and understanding who your followers are and who they are as a brand in terms of when you want to talk about them and they're no longer in the room and you need to discuss them with other people. Like, that's fundamental to the team. Like, that's how the team, how you see the team and how you work with the team. So I'm curious, having gone sort of like a roundabout, back to the idea of team building as someone who's built 3-4 teams and helped other people build tons of teams. What goes into that for you? What is it that you find in essential when you're trying to build a team?
Oh, I have a few rules that I live by when it comes to building a team. That I find the people that follow these rules are significantly more impactful and successful as managers and in the company than people that don't follow these rules. And I think I can speak maybe to why they're not followed, but at least initially. First one is only hire people that are better than yourself. If you're hiring a copywriter, and I'll use myself in the marketing world for example, if I'm hiring a writer, they have to be better than at writing than I am. If I feel that I might be a better writer than them, I'm not going to hire them. If I want a designer, they've got to be able to design better than me. If I'm hiring again, if even from the engineering side, if you're hiring a DevOps person, if a developer's hiring a DevOps person and they know more about DevOps than the person they're hiring, it is a safe hire because they're not going to challenge you and they're going to do what you say, but they're not going to get you far at all.
Right. You can delegate tasks to them, but you can't delegate responsibilities and authority to them.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to pick you up on something. I don't like the word responsibility.
That's fine. Go for it. Let's talk about it.
I don't like the word responsibility because it leads to, when used incorrectly, a get-out-of-jail-free card for when things f up. Am I allowed to say that word on this podcast?
Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead.
Fine. It's a way of saying, well, it's not my responsibility. Or actually, this is her responsibility. I'm not going to do it. It's his responsibility. Right. I'm a big believer, and I push this quite hard, of ownership over responsibility every single time.
Okay, I can take that. I can accept that, but I am going to push back a little bit.
Please.
Because when I talk about responsibility, I'm actually talking about it from the ownership perspective. When I talk to a company and I work with them on scaling and I say, listen, you have to define roles, and what you're going to define in that role is what ownership looks like. And ownership has 3 parts to it. It has, what is the responsibility of the person who owns this? What is the authority that they have to be able to get things done without talking to anybody else? And what are the metrics by which you are going to define success for that person? Now, this is not responsibility in the sense of I can shirk responsibility, but rather if you want this role, you have to own this responsibility. And so I think when it's used in that way, it works. And at the same time, I agree with you when it is used to shirk and to say, it's his, hers.
So I'll tell you what I think the difference is between and we're saying very similar things, but I think the devil is very much in the detail. Tell what the difference is between, in my mind, responsibility and ownership. You live in a house. You have a lovely house. You've got a lovely bedroom. You're asleep in your bed one night, and a ball goes through the window, breaks the glass. There's glass everywhere because there are kids outside playing football. Should they be doing that? No. You're now lying in bed. It's cold. Let's say it's raining, and there's glass on the floor. Who's responsible for fixing the window? The kids. They broke it. But you own the house. It's your ownership. Right. Which means that if they don't fix the window, you can lie in bed surrounded by broken glass with rain coming in saying, it's not my responsibility, it's their responsibility. Or you can get out of bed, pay the money, take the pain, take the hit, because someone needs to fix the window so you can go to sleep. That, in my mind, is the difference.
Okay.
There we go.
Fundamentally, I agree with you. However,
good.
I think that the nature of what you are discussing as responsibility is it lies in whether or not those kids knock on the door and say, we did this. That's when we talk about responsibility in the format that I'm trying to bring it. And I think that when someone is taking responsibility or is being given responsibility, and here's the thing, it's about being able to give somebody responsibility. Part of giving them responsibility is giving them ownership of that thing, that task. But it's not just task oriented. That's the whole thing. Like, I would hope when you have a content writer, and you say to them, your responsibility is to own content. And it means that you have the authority to decide what content looks like on our whatever channels you've given them ownership over. And here's the metrics by which I'm going to judge whether or not you have successfully fulfilled this role. Right?
Yes. But I want somebody who's up at night worrying. Like, I don't worry about stuff if I know that somebody on my team is up at night worrying about it. And to be lying in bed at night and wake up and thinking, oh shit, what are the metrics on this? Or I never posted that thing. That level of that, in my mind, that's ownership. Because responsibility, in a small way, dies at 5 o'clock in the evening and starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. Ownership bleeds into your life and your psyche, where if things are going well, hallelujah, we're over the moon, and when things are not great, you personally worry about it.
I mean, but with that, I'd kind of want people to have a life outside of their work.
Oh, 100%. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong.
I don't really want people at 5 o'clock in the morning going, oh man.
We are both on the same page there. Let me put it to you this way. You should be good enough at your job that you can turn off at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
I'll put it to you like that. And those are the people that I want to hire. I like hiring people who have, big responsibilities outside of work because they get stuff done, because they understand the importance, and then they're good enough, ideally, again, it's talking about building a good team. Hire somebody good enough that you don't need to call them in the evening, because everything that needs to be done is done by 5 o'clock.
And even if there is a problem, they're going to bring you solutions and not just the problem itself. Like,
Correct.
They are going to let you know, hey, this is something which I'm not sure how to deal with, but here are some ideas that I have. These are outside of my authority. Would it be okay if I did one of these?
Yep.
Right? But they know those limits on their authority, but at the same time, they also know that if they come to you with that solution, there's a really good likelihood you're going to go, but it's in my authority to give you the right to do that. Check, go.
Yep. I mean, best case scenario, they've put a solution in place, even if it's the wrong one. Like, I'm a big believer of, if you think there's something that's broken, try fixing it, and then afterwards we'll go back and see if it was the right decision. Again, going back to the bad housing example, I don't necessarily want somebody who's going to call me up and say, hey, I'm lying in bed, I'm surrounded by broken glass, here are 3 possible solutions that I can do. I'd like you first to call the window guy and see if he's available to come around immediately, and then when he's on his way to you, call me and let me know you've called him. But now we're nitpicking.
Right. I understand what you're saying. Makes sense. Okay, so that's one thing, is hire someone who is essentially better at whatever job you want them to do than you are. And 2, I think we've sort of really nailed down the idea. These have to be people who are capable of taking ownership and understand what that ownership looks like in terms of the responsibility, authority, and metrics that you're giving them in the entirety of it. So what else?
So in my opinion, there's one more step, which is give them all the permissions that they need and then get out of their way. I'm a big believer in not clocking hours, in having unlimited holiday days, and letting people decide when and where they want to work from, as long as things get done. I'm a big believer in stepping on people's toes and hiring people who will step on each other's and step on my toes. Give them the agency to define for themselves how to see success and run with it. And I think if you have those 3 things in place, you have somebody who's better than you are, you have somebody with strong sense of ownership, and you have somebody that you've given or enabled agency to or for, get out of the way. From that point on, they should be off. They should be running, and you're there to support them. You're there to be their cheerleader when they need a cheerleader, or their shield when they need a shield. And apart from that, you're letting them get on with the best works they can. I used to be a very bad micromanager when I started in this industry, until I hired people who were better than me. And then I realized, hang on a second, I can't micromanage you on this. You have to tell me what you're doing because I don't understand it anymore. And when I reached that level, I'm like, okay, great. You're somebody I want on my team.
Okay. So how do you take someone like that and help them grow? If we say that part of the role of leadership, right, is to then take these people and give them a sense of where they can go to, what they can grow into, mentor them, take them. If they're better than you at this thing,
Yep.
Where do you often see growth in that world?
So let's take a very practical example.
Mm-hmm.
I own, should we say, the SDR team in my company. SDR, which is sales development, which is often the first kind of interaction that a customer will have with us, be it inbound or outbound. And I can talk about SDRs for hours and hours. But this is a role, and the reason why I'm picking on it is because it's a role that has, if it's a choose your own adventure novel for the rest of your career, it is a very thick and vast book. Typically, SDRs have been known to go from sales development into a sales role. They also go into account management role. Sometimes they go into product. Sometimes they love being sales development and they stay there and they become a single contributor who's able to provide for the entire company sometimes and make a lot of money doing that. Sometimes they become managers, team leaders. I know people that have gone from SDR to HR because there's a natural progression there, reaching out to people and finding, potential new talent as opposed to new customers. So it's a role that enables, 10 potential great, viable next steps. And my conversation early on in the interview process is, I know this is going to sound like a cheesy, cliche question. The question I would like to ask is, where do you want to be in 3 years' time or 5 years' time? But that always comes across as cheesy and cliche. So the way I normally push it is, okay, if you work with me, my goal will be that if you're working on your job, I will have time to focus on helping you get to where you're trying to get to. Now, that could be 5 or 10 different places. And by the way, you don't have to know the answer right now. But when you know where you want to go, come tell me. Maybe now it's in the interview, and we can talk for an extra 20 minutes about how you want to be an AE one day, or how you want to be customer success one day, and how you get there. Maybe you'll start the job not knowing what it takes and not knowing what it requires, and then you'll do it for 3 years, and you're like, I love this. I want to be an SDR for the rest of my life. I want to manage people, or I don't want to manage people. And if you do your job, that frees me up to help you get to where you're trying to get to. And I'm a big believer in, if you hire somebody great, if you have strong talent density, it almost doesn't matter what their role is. There should be a lot of parallel movement within companies. If you're amazing at growth and you live in the PPC world and you want to move to SEO, or you want to go to management, you want to go to budget, you want to go to analytics, there's so much overlap. The main thing you're looking for is that talent density. Finding the right people is more important than the role. And the way you enable your staff is by saying to them, if you prove yourself to be good, we can give you whatever role that makes sense.
Right. As long as you've shown an interest and given us the ability to help guide you there so that we know that you're ready for it.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm talking about the business side, but this is 100% true in the development and the tech side as well. If you have a good junior developer, there are 30 roles that could be open to them. They can move towards DevOps. They can move towards becoming a data scientist. They can become a prompt engineer. There's 10 roles out there. And typically, your great junior engineers will be great at those next things as well. And it's almost interchangeable, not in terms of skill set at all, but it's interchangeable as a great hire will be valuable. It almost doesn't matter where you put them.
Right. It's just a function of what they need to learn along the way to be able to, or in the role, to be able to do that role exceptionally well. And they'll figure that out.
Absolutely. And if that means promotions from where they are, taking on new challenges, or a leadership role or a management role, or moving vertically into a different role with similar skill sets, or moving, a little bit further out and learning something new,
Right.
Great people are great. It's so true. If you find somebody good, like, keep them. They make your company better.
Okay. I think I'd like to take a. I'm gonna take a 90-degree turn on you for a minute, because one of the things that I know is a significant issue in, or not issue, but of significance in a lot of places, is how well people can work together and what teamwork looks like in terms of people skills, right? In terms of how people build trust and things like that. And I know that one of the things that sometimes impacts that can be something as simple as ADHD or other, other things that come up. And you actually are very open about the fact that you have dyslexia and you also have Tourette's.
Yep.
So how does that play out, and how have you enabled yourself to get where you've gotten given those things?
It's a bit of an interesting one. I've never not had dyslexia, and I mean developed Tourette's about the age of like 9 or 10. So I don't know what it's like to not be with it, but I do know for me, being that kid in the back of the class, with facial twitches and muscular twitches, and having what felt like little faith in me from my teachers. Some schools, some subjects I was very good at. Always good at math, always good at the sciences. Struggled past other things. Didn't particularly have a strong academic drive or any desire to really kind of work hard in school. And that was very much reflected back towards me. And it kind of exacerbated the spiral of I wasn't going to work hard, so they didn't take much of me, and they didn't think much of me, so I wasn't going to work hard. And then late teens, early 20s, that became like my drive. It was to show them that they were wrong. And my drive now for success, possibly unhealthily, is very much I put my personal value to how I'm doing professionally. I tie those two together.
Okay.
So I've basically been left with a relatively low ego, not much faith in myself. I follow the advice of like remember all the compliments and forget all the insults. I find myself continually doing the exact opposite of that.
Exact opposite all the time.
And therefore, to continually prove my self-worth, I need to be a success. And that drive has, for better or worse, been the main booster, the main motivator that I've had over the last 20 years now in this industry. It was, I'm going to prove to other people that I can, and this is the way that I have to show that I'm worth something. I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying for me, because I had a childhood where I was often seen as the outsider, there's a song by Matchbox 20 called Unwell. If you ever listen to that song, you know it. Like that sums up in a nutshell how I felt as a teenager. The idea of kind of be sitting on the train and wondering who's looking at you, and thinking about who's looking at you make you more worried, and therefore you twitch more, and therefore you worry more about who's looking at you. And I still get Tourette's attacks relatively frequently, every couple of months or so. And every time I do, you play the games in your head of who can see, who knows what's going on. And even if I'm standing perfectly still and no one can see anything, in my mind, the entire room is staring at me.
Right.
And that way of sculpting your self-worth, not necessarily healthily, is one which has, for me, created that big drive. So to go back with your first question of kind of how did this build my relationship with others, most rooms I'm in, I hardly ever go into a room and think I'm the smartest person in the room. I normally walk into a room and think these people know what they're talking about and I'm the fraud, and I need to prove myself, or I need to listen and learn, and I need to shut up and let these people kind of guide the way that things should be moving, which means that I listen a lot, and that means that I tend not to do the Israeli thing of interrupting people when you've had an idea and then hold it in your mind and wait to say it and wait for the gap in the conversation and speak what you have to say, and ignore the fact that they've been speaking for the last 5 minutes and you haven't been listening because you've been thinking about what you're saying next. that
And
helped me a lot,
what
socially, professionally.
was that? Like the implication is there's some imposter syndrome going on there,
Oh yeah.
because very clearly you've been very successful with what you've done. A, but B, do you ever take preemptive steps when you meet people, saying, listen, just so you know, I've got this, what is essentially, and I use this very cautiously,
Please.
a hidden disability, right? Which people would not necessarily know or see, but you know that it can impact how you're responding, your capacity to respond, etc., and impact your cognitive responses when you're in that moment. Do you preempt, or do you just let it be as something which nobody needs to know about until it happens, and when it happens, I'll deal with it?
I do sometimes. Dyslexia, I tend not to. Dyslexia, I have enough coping methods and I have enough mechanisms that I've worked with that, I have readers, I have speech to text, I have text to speech, I have 100 things technologically which help me when I need to, and I tend not to read things out loud in public, so it affects me less. On the Tourette side, I do sometimes. Again, it depends how I'm doing at the time. Like, I could have a few great weeks, or I could have a rough week. And if I'm having a rough week, I'll definitely tell people. I've I've had times when I've twitched like so hard or so often that I like pull muscles in my jaw, and then it actually gets painful to talk. But that's not something that happens super often. I'll tell you a brilliant story. When I was back at Feedvisor, we were asked to be keynote speaker at the Amazon Sellers Conference in Seattle. So this is several thousand, possibly 10,000 people in the room. When this was being recorded and streamed to possibly hundreds of thousands of people. And beforehand, I was very nervous about my twitching. It was at a time where, all the stress leading up to this, we had a huge keynote speech. I was on stage solo, flew over from Israel for it, so I was exhausted before I even started. And like remembering as much as I could, because again, I wasn't going to read it, I was going to dictate it or present it without a script. So I probably spent 3 days beforehand just stressing about this. And as always, when you add stress and you're worried about Tourette's, the Tourette's gets worse. It's like having a sneeze and not being able to sneeze. Or it's like having a cough and not being able to cough. The longer you go without coughing, the worse and the itchier it feels, and then you do a really big cough and you have a coughing fit. That's probably the closest example I can give. So before the speech, I went into the bathroom there, and sometimes you can twitch a lot in the bathroom, kind of get it out your system. So when you're on stage, it's toned down a bit. And I was very, very nervous. I think the presentation went well. Watching it back, over YouTube many times, it's there somewhere if you want to find it. Like it seemed to present well, but I was petrified the whole way through that people were going to ask questions. And this was back in the day, if you remember, 10, 15 years ago, where they had the big social boards behind you when you presented. And every time somebody tweeted an Seller Conference Seattle, it popped up in balloons. And I was so nervous that the balloons that were popping up behind me and the speech bubbles were coming up were just saying, what's he doing with his arms? Why is he making those funny faces? Like, in my mind, that's the only thing that anyone saw. And I turned around and I looked at this wall at one point towards the end, and every comment was like, oh my God, I love the British accent. He sounds like he's from Notting Hill. And I was like, brilliant. I'll take that. No problem. If that is your takeaway, then fine. And it reminds you that what you think in your head, or what you expect other people to be thinking in their heads, is often so far from the truth. But we build these realities ourselves of what other people think about us, and then we conform to those ideas. So this is a very long way round of saying it's taken me a while to get used to it myself. Having Tourette's is not easy, and it will take me probably decades to kind of be at peace with it in a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
But because you're constantly feeling like you're being judged, it creates a level of humility which is very useful. to put it in a weird way. I hope that makes sense.
It actually does. I think, first of all, I want to speak to just a moment to the idea that not everybody's thinking about you when you're standing in front of the like they don't care. Like, it's such a true statement. Like, it's one of the few ways that I get over my own stage fright of giving presentations. Forget classrooms where I don't have that anymore, but when I'm giving a proper 150, 200, 300, 500, 1,000 person room, and I'm giving a talk, and they're not so interested in me as I think they are. They're listening. It's nice, but I'm not like. It's a good thing to know.
I think you often are, but I know this from great speakers. I've seen great speakers such as yourself, where you get off stage and you're thinking, I ruined the punchline of this story, or I meant to say something really important to the plot and I forgot to say it. But the truth is, nobody else knows what you being perfect looks like. So to them, it was a perfectly fine story and it made great sense, and you caught their attention. So you only are aware of the imperfections that they're not even aware of most of the time.
But it's the same thing with you. I'm saying that's almost the same thing with you, where you're saying they aren't seeing the things that were bothering me because they are bothering me. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I think a lot of people, when they get up and give a presentation, whether it's to their boss or to whoever, yes, the boss sees them, but the boss is not necessarily seeing.
They're listening to the content, they're focused on the ideas, they're having the discussion in their heads about if it's a good idea or it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, for me, a great takeaway is the amount of times public speakers, again, I know great public speakers, focus on things like, what do I wear? And if you ask anyone a week after the speech, tell me about the talk, they'll say, he gave this idea, he said this amazing story, there's this inspirational line that I remembered, and you say, what did he wear? They're like, I don't know, a shirt maybe? T-shirt? I can't remember. But that's what you fascinate on beforehand, because you've given the speech 100 times. So in your mind, the speech isn't the hard part, it's what's my backdrop? What do I look like? Have I done a haircut or not? But if you ask people themselves, they're seeing you for the first time. They're often focused on content, they're focused on value.
Even if they've seen you the second or third time, it's still the case. It's that concept of like, people think much more about themselves when it comes to this than they actually, than other people are actually thinking about them, just fundamentally. So that's number one, and I think that's an important point. Just across the board, people should be aware of that. I think people are, but they haven't really internalized it. The other thing, which for me is, I think, very telling, is that it still takes a great deal of courage to be willing to put yourself out there with that fear, with that sense of, I'm about to go up on stage and I am very potentially going to have an attack on stage. And I'm not going to sit there and start out with, listen, everybody, I just want you all to know I have Tourette's, and there's a possibility that during the blah, blah. With my students, for instance, because they have to deal with me for a full semester, right? I will generally start class 1 with, okay, let's just get this out of the way so that it's out of the way. Yes, I'm a disabled veteran. I have complex regional pain syndrome. It hurts a lot. There's a likelihood that at some point I will start gumming up my words because of the pain at some point over the semester. Just give me a minute. I'll be fine. And we'll keep going because I'll be in pain. But I do that with that pre-knowledge of, like, I'm going to have to meet these people for 13 weeks.
Yeah, but I almost don't have the courage to do that. I'd almost rather start and hope nothing goes wrong. And it may be the wrong decision, by the way.
No, I'm saying I think it takes a great deal of courage to get up on a stage and not make that statement and just see what happens.
I mean, I like how you call it courage. It's like the courage of driving down the road blindfolded. Yes, call it courage. Some may call it stupidity. You're not preparing for what may horribly go wrong. But
you're hoping for the best, dude. You're hoping for the best. Come on.
That's me. I'll take the position of the optimist anytime. No problem.
Okay. Segueing from optimism into, like, what do you see as, like, the major things that are coming in your field? Like, how do you see marketing changing? Like, and don't get me wrong, SDRs are important, but, like, I'd like to, like, let's take this to the point of really talking about marketing.
Okay.
What's going on here?
So I'm going to give the most cliche answer you're going to hear, but I'm going to give it from a completely different direction from anyone else that you've heard it give, or possibly
Okay,
given it so far.
go for it.
There have been several revolutions in the world of business. Sometimes they are broad, sometimes they are niche. In 1916, at the Paris Air Show, for the world, to see for the very first time, autopilot was shown off. And this was a triumph of engineering, a marvel of technology. And there were authors and writers and journalists all over the world saying, this is the end of the pilot. Autopilot now exists. It can fly a plane. There will be no more need for pilot. Do not become a pilot. What actually happened in the over 100 years since then is that air travel has become cheaper, more accessible, much safer. We're talking, degrees of magnitude safer.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more pilots today than there ever would have been if the autopilot wouldn't have been created.
Right.
And another great example that I love is when the sewing machine was invented. And look this up because this is like both amazing, wonderful, and horrific. There was a riot in Paris with all the seamstresses literally going house to house, finding and destroying sewing machines, and they went to factories and they burnt them down because they were so scared it would come and it would take away their job. But the truth is, the clothes that we wear today are cheaper, high quality, again, depending on where you buy it, but we've enabled an industry that never would have existed if we were still based on tailors and seamstresses sitting in shops making clothes. And I say this because I think the next huge thing will be AI, but the way of looking at it is critical. The best pilots today are the ones that know how to use the autopilot better than anyone else. The best tailors today are the ones that can use a sewing machine better than anyone else. It is a waste of all the time and energy you have to rally against the evolution of your industry. AI has come. I don't personally believe, and by the way, this is a conversation that could be a whole other podcast. I don't believe we will get to AGI anytime soon. I don't believe we'll get it in our lifetime. I think that you have that problem of getting something 95% the way there is 10% of the battle, and getting that last 5% is the next huge problem that you can't even envision. And we're seeing that, by the way, with things like self-driving cars, where they're really, really, really good, but getting them quite good enough has been like every year for the last 10 years, Elon Musk has said, next year we'll get it, next year we'll get it. And Elon, he's got a point. It's always going to be next year, and it may be next year for a decade or two to go. But I think that the best marketers today are the ones who are using these new tools, learning how to use AI to create keywords, to create content, to build marketing plans, to come up with ideas, to analyze data, to do everything that we know AI is good for. And we're now in a gold rush. Let me be very clear. I strongly believe this is a bubble. If it bursts in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be picking up this clip and saying to people, hey, I told you so. If it doesn't, then we're going to bury this podcast and it never happens, so we're fine. So I'm going to win on my prediction either way. But as I said, no AGI in my lifetime. AI is currently a bubble that will burst. It's being fueled for all the right reasons.
Define burst.
There's more money being put into potential AI companies and in the potential market of what AI will look like in 5 to 10 years than there actually is problems willing to be solved. It's a little bit like the cybersecurity pace was 15 years ago, where the investment into cybersecurity in the early 2000s and early teens was bigger than the market potential for those products.
Right.
And we saw that happen. And now cybersecurity is very much like on a safe space and a plateau, and it's doing well. But major cybersecurity companies had to buckle to get there because there wasn't enough of a market. And there was too much money being put in and too much of a return demanded. There was however many billions being spent requires a 10x billion return, and there wasn't a 10x billion market in place.
All right, so let's use argument that you made earlier, the Ask Jeeves and Googling it, Yahooing it argument for AI today. AI today started with, OpenAI. That's where this that's
The
that's the
ChatGPT moment. It's going to be
that's the
studied for years to come in business
Right.
schools and technical books.
We look at that, but if we look at ChatGPT today, it's still new enough and advanced enough in relation to many of the other, Gemini, Claude, some of the other major ones out there, which are still playing catch up a little bit, I think,
Yep.
that they haven't yet found the niche that will allow them, not even niche, the angle that will allow them to take over as that, fine tuning that we spoke about. What do you see in your world of marketing being the one or two major places that AI, or one or two major, I don't want to say companies because companies come and go, but or get bought up or whatever, but major functions that you see AI really needing to niche down in and develop for them to continue to exist as a significant impactor, not a everyday, okay, fine, we're using AI to write some content or whatever, significant impactor in marketing.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the question, then I'm going to go back and challenge a premise you made.
Go for it.
To answer your question, I don't think it's content. I think content itself still has human value, still needs direction, and it's going to become commoditized. If you're using ChatGPT to write content for you, congratulations, you've reached step one of a 10-step plan. I don't think that's smart or clever anymore, for want of a better word. Anyone can open up ChatGPT and with a good prompt get good content, with a great prompt get great content.
Yep.
That's mediocre prompt equals mediocre content. It's what you put in, what you take out. But there are so many fine-tuning elements in marketing. I'm talking about things that you may not even think are critical because they're well into the weeds. Things like keyword research, PPC analysis, things like drip campaigns. Oh my gosh, so much revenue is generated by drip campaigns from companies. And to A/B test requires you sending out multiple variations of emails. You have multivariate testing now, which is when you're changing, 3, 5, 10, 100 things on an email. If you have an audience of, I don't know, I'm playing a game here, but you have an audience of about 200,000 or 100,000 people. If you get an AI to build and test different content, different email campaigns, different messaging to different people, it's almost inevitable it's going to come up with good messaging at a good time to the right person. The challenge, by the way, interestingly, and I'm sidetracking myself, but I will come back and challenge your premise, is that it's not a big data problem. It's a small data problem.
Right.
AI works because it trains itself on hundreds of millions, billions, trillions of decisions, which it can simulate and make in a very short amount of time. It can read hundreds of millions of books. It can, perform hundreds of millions of actions in simulation. But when you're looking at the real world, let's say looking at email response rates, looking at email to revenue clicks, looking at PPC campaigns, it's a small data problem. You have hundreds of cents, thousands of cents. So you need to build models that can understand, analyze small data and make decisions on that. And AI seems to be doing that quite well. It's learning how to do that quickly. But those are the parts of jobs which will be completely transformed. And instead of you running a PPC campaign, it's how well can you manage the AI that runs a PPC campaign. But to go back to your point earlier, you mentioned, there's Claude and there's ChatGPT and there's, 3 other variants. That's not where I see the bubble.
Right. Okay.
I see the bubble as the 30 startups that I've spoken to in the last 2 months that said, we've built a chatbot for small businesses, or we've built a AI that can understand your HubSpot, or we built an AI that can understand your support documentation. All of that's true. But the same way now there is essentially one search engine with 2 or 3 secondary ones, and there's one operating system and 2 or 3 secondary ones, and there's maybe 2 CRMs and 3 or 4 secondary ones. There's always consolidation. Consolidation is inevitable in the AI space. And the so-called leaders right now in the AI space, NVIDIA, aren't making software. They're on the hardware side.
Right.
So I would argue that there are triple-digit companies in this industry that have arisen geographically in the last year, all claiming to be the next AI blank. And I think it's a bubble because it's fundamentally impossible for them all to be successful. The odds are there will be one or two which are successful, and you'll have some which will pivot and build something new, but the money going in compared to the money coming out, just in my mind, doesn't tell a story. It's a lot of small bets. Some of them will pay off, but the vast majority won't.
I agree with you. That wasn't the point that I was trying to make. I absolutely agree with you that the bubble is not the Chat GPT, Gemini, Claude bubble. That's not what the bubble is. That was just a comment about whether, one of those is eventually going to be the one which does enough of the fine tuning to be able to be the Google, as it were.
Yep.
Right now, it happens to be Chat GPT, and the other two are vying for second place. But how long will that last?
And they'll specialize. Like, listen, we still have several social networks, but they all do different things. Like LinkedIn is for a specific person. Facebook is for a specific person. I think we'll get to that same plateau with the large AI companies.
Right. On the other hand, I absolutely agree with you that, like, someone was like, David, you're so knowledgeable. Why don't you start doing and this was the idea, was like, why don't you start doing like a leadership, followership, HR, chat thing where it essentially analyzes people's Slack messages and emails and yada yada yada, and tells leaders how they who that follower is for them and what kind of followership they're representing and what's the best way to deal with it. And I was like, because ChatGPT can do that. Like, if someone said, I need to know how best to respond to this, here's what you need to know about this person. Here are some of our recent conversations. Here's some of the stuff. I'd like you to give me an analysis of this person's followership style and nature of followership, and what is the best leadership style I can use right now to get this person to do A, B, and C, because that's what I need from them. Please give me you don't need a whole system behind you to do that. It takes you literally 2 minutes of your time. And I think you're right. I think that if I were to start a company that suddenly does this, and there are companies that are doing something very similar things, not exactly the same thing, it would be a bubble. It would be part of the bubble.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're remembering back, if you want to see this, again, I mentioned social media, but it happened with social media in the early 2000s when every startup was a social media company, and right now there's 3, 4, 5 social media companies and all the others are gone. It happened in the retail space when, at the very beginning of the bubble in the late 90s, where Amazon blew up and everyone had an online store. Literally, I knew tens of people that were selling something online. Nowadays, I don't know anyone who has their own online store, but everyone had one once.
Or they do, but they have them on Shopify, if you're a Shopify, or Etsy, or Amazon, depending on the nature of your thing. That's what you do.
and that's why I think this is a bubble. I think that the investors right now playing in the space, I think they're smart, but I think they recognize that they are absolutely rolling the dice in the roulette wheel. And they believe that they are making educated guesses. And all of them believe that they've made the right decision, but statistically, single-digit percentage of them are right.
Right. Okay, so having discussed quite a few topics, which I think were extremely interesting, I do have one question.
Yeah.
If you could go back and give yourself some advice to, Shmuli, Bar-Ilan Acting Society, getting married, back in the day, what would be one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I thought of it and then I immediately countered myself. I would have said I'd go back and say, don't worry. It's going to be okay. But I also worried that if I would have done that and gone back and given myself that advice, it might have been a get out of jail free card and I might have just sat on the couch playing computer games for 20 years.
Okay. So give yourself a moment. What advice would you actually want to go back and give yourself that might not involve you spending the next 30 years going, I'm going to be a gamer for the rest of my life. I'm going to make money doing this. Watch. Ha ha.
That's not a bad thing, by the way. One day I'll get there. Tell you what I'll say to myself. I would go back to myself and I would say, if you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong. You need to be out of your comfort zone. You need to be doing big things. You need to be trying things which you don't think will work. Don't be a dick and focus on getting shit done. And if you follow kind of the don't be a dick, get shit done mentality, I think that's advice to give to anyone. I mean, there's something I tell my kids, which is that, if you look statistically, the average polar bear, when they're hunting for food, is only successful about 1 time in 20. When you're looking at those documentaries of like polar bear hunting seals, seal always gets away. Polar bears win 1 in 20, that's it. And the lesson that we can learn from this is that, polar bears have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. They're still here, they're still around. And unless we do something stupid to kill them all off, they'll probably be here for the next few 100,000 years as well. Like success
Stupid
should
humans.
not be judged. Success should not be judged by, was this a success or wasn't it? Because the truth is, everything leads to something greater. And if you continually push yourself out of your comfort zone, if you continually put yourself in a position where you need to do new things, you need to push yourself, you need to learn, you need to work out how to solve the problem, and you focus on kind of like getting things done and not being a dick about it, that is how I personally believe you have the biggest chance of being successful in life.
I like it. I definitely agree with the pushing yourself out of the comfort zone a bit.
Yeah. Oh,
without a doubt, constantly get into the fear zone as often as you possibly can, and grow and learn there, because that zone, that's the place to be.
Yep. So that's what I have on my tombstone. If you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong.
I like it. All right, Shmuli, this has been awesome.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us in the Doctor's Den. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hope to see you next time.